All right. Well, thank you very much. Very much appreciate you having me. I'm gonna try and see if I can share here PowerPoint. So 99% probably of what we do at Warp is working with folks who don't necessarily have, tons and tons of marine projects, but have the one-off. So maybe once in a while you have to do a job on a dock or, regarding pilings, things like that. And you just need to know, do we need to get longshore? Do we not? And so that's most of what we do is figuring out, are the employees, even though they normally are construction folks, are they entitled to longshore benefits? So it is extremely confusing to figure out, is it something where it's required or not? So I'm going to try and unravel it a little bit as much as possible. So I'm going to talk about why is it important to carry? What is it? How does it apply in Washington? And specifically, how does it apply to construction? Um, so first of all, we'll jump in. So even if you're not sure if you need it as an employer, or you're not sure if the employees are entitled to it, there are some benefits. So Longshore doesn't have a deductible. There's, very steep penalties for noncompliance, which I'll mention in a little bit. There's liability if you don't take care of your employees who are entitled to it, including everyone in the company, all officers being responsible. Um, Outside vendors performing work may not carry the coverage, and then that responsibility flows upward. So even if you're pulling in somebody to do a small job that's subject to longshore, if they don't cover it, that can go up to you. And also legal protection from longshore claims by employees, even if you're not sure if it applies. I wanted to give kind of a fun example of how longshore defense can help. So this was 2012, a Portland, Oregon employee working for Marine Terminals Corp. And he brought a longshore claim against his employer, which was a marine terminal. Operation did everything they were supposed to. And they said 2006, claimant drank 2 beers before going to work at 8 a.m. Between 8 a.m. and noon, he drank an additional 3 beers. At lunch, he consumed 4 to 5 more beers. Not sure how he was standing up at this point. Between the end of lunch and the end of the day, he also drank more than a half pint of whiskey. There's a little something to be said about supervision here, but beyond that, at approximately 4:30 p.m., he decided to relieve himself near the rail of the dock. While doing so, he fell over the rail onto a concrete and steel ledge. And after the fall, he was taken by ambulance to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with acute alcohol intoxication. I would hope so. Cannabis ingestion, and a severe scalp laceration. So the terminal said, there's no way we're going to pay this. But the employee brought the claim, and they were fighting out because there is a clause that says if intoxication is the sole cause of the injury, then they don't have to pay under longshore. But the claimant, well, he couldn't remember a lot of what happened. He thought he remembered tripping over an orange cone. So the court said, yep, okay, you owe benefits. So, of course, they did appeal and it was overturned. But if you think about how much, fighting these, without having to pay damages for this guy who obviously, was not doing what he was supposed to, it's the attorney fees. So it's that defense of something like this where you want to make sure you've got somebody defending that claim who knows what they're doing. So what is longshore? I'm going to go very briefly. Nobody wants to dig in too much, but in general, Jones Act happened in 1920. So the federal courts knew they needed to protect mariners, crew members on vessels. But what they realized is that they weren't giving protection to the dock workers, so folks that were loading, unloading cargo from ships. So in 1927, they extended the Jones Act landward and said, okay, we're also going to include those dock workers, shipyard workers. The problem was we didn't have, one common law for everybody. We had all these piecemeal laws and acts. So there were a lot of confusion that developed. They tried to amend in 1972 the act to make it a little bit clearer, but it didn't really work. There was still confusion. So what kind of confusion arises? We'll talk about in just a second. So first, just to understand, there are some parts of the Longshore Act as well. It's not just Longshore. Longshore pays for benefits of employment-related accidental injury, occupational disease, or death of a covered maritime employee. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. Although it is similar to state workers' comp, so it's a lot like L&I, but Longshore is more liberal. So if you've got a claimant and they're not sure whether they were injured under L&I or injured under Longshore, and they get an attorney, the attorney is going to recommend that they first go to Longshore because the benefits are much broader. I just wanted to mention just the subsets, Defense Base Act. Anytime you're doing work for the government outside of the US, you're usually going to be under Defense Base Act. It was intended to be on a US base, but these days, most of the time, any government contract work outside the US is usually under Defense Base Act. Outer continental shelf lands, that's coming into play with offshore wind. So there are a lot of cases where starting to do work on offshore wind or environmental surveys and things are starting to come into play there. And non-appropriated fund instrumentality, we don't really run into it. It's more like workers that work for the commissary on a Navy base, things like that. So don't worry too much. So who really is covered by the Longshore Act? So you've got employees engaged in maritime work, which is called status, on navigable waters or adjoining areas, which is situs. So anytime you're deciding, is this subject to Longshore, you have to look at the status and the situs. It also doesn't include crew on a vessel. That's intended to be Jones Act and not otherwise excluded. There are some exclusions, which we'll talk about. So here are some of the issues we off the bat start running into. Number one, they said, okay, it's on navigable waters, but what is a navigable waterway? The Act does not define what a navigable waterway is. Underwriting wise, a lot of times they'll use the Coast Guard navigable list, but that's not defined under the Act. So there can be cases, lawsuits where something that is listed as navigable under the Coast Guard is not necessarily navigable under the Act. What does adjoining area mean? So if you're doing work adjoining the water, what does that mean? It's not defined. And it depends. It depends on where you are. Here in the Washington State area, we are the Ninth Circuit. So they have a paragraph long how they consider status to work. If it's not in the Act, they go to the court cases and they look at precedents. So it gets very confusing. Not crew on a vessel. Well, what if it's usually a vessel, but they're temporarily in the yard? What if they're not on contract yet? They're usually crew, but they're not contracted yet. And not otherwise excluded. There are exclusions, but they're very narrowly construed in the courts, and they are constantly being challenged. So it gets very confusing. Even we've talked to the L&I folks, and there are even L&I folks who sometimes have interpreted the exclusions incorrectly. So especially there's an exclusion for vendors temporarily on the site of a maritime situs. But that is extremely narrowly construed. And we'll go into that as well. So anyone who isn't confused really doesn't understand the situation. This gets very, very difficult to tell sometimes. So first, how is this different from the Jones Act? So before 1920, you had general maritime law. So seagoing workers, crewmen, were allowed to have what they call maintenance and cure. So think of cure being your medical, improvement, getting to your maximum medical improvement, and maintenance being your costs, your maintenance costs, your wages, lost wages. And you were entitled to a seaworthy vessel. So that was just general maritime law. But you didn't have any rights if the employer was negligent. So that's where the Jones Act stepped in. They said, okay, if you have a seaman who suffers personal injury in the course of employment, you can now sue your employer. So now this brings in negligence. And then 1927, we talked about the Longshore Act extended it landward, but it doesn't apply to Jones Act status. So it is important, and we'll say, how do you keep them clear, to find a maritime attorney, insurance broker who really gets this, because even those who do this day after day, it can get extremely confusing. It's also not a guarantee. So you can claim under any of these three jurisdictions, but it's not a guarantee the claim will fall there. I had a coworker at one point who had a client working in a parking lot, and they were working on a pipe in the parking lot. It was like nowhere near the water, and they ended up fighting it out because the pipe had an outflow into the waterway, and so they were fighting that it was a longshore claim. Still fighting as far as I know. I haven't heard any updates on that, but it can get very frustrating. So if you don't have longshore, but you're found to need it, the act actually calls for the ability to have imprisonment up to a year, which I think is one of the only insurance related laws that can do that. Also up to a $10,000 fine. And imprisonment and fines can apply to all officers of a corporation. Now you don't have somebody coming out here, the longshore police with their clipboard saying, okay, where's your certificate of insurance? Not going to happen. There's nobody who is, paid to enforce this. But what happens is if you have a claim for something else, this comes up, then those things can apply. There's also the courts look very negatively upon an employer who was supposed to have it and didn't. There's a good example of a positive. So September last year, there's a company called Swift Ships, and they had a painter fall through a hatch. And the painter tried to sue his employer and say, hey, the employer should have warned me that this hatch was open so I didn't fall through it. But because the employer had longshore, it was considered to be longshore jurisdiction. The employer was protected. They said, nope, they didn't have that negligence requirement. If they hadn't had longshore, they probably would have, and they would have been responsible. So it was a big deal. There's also certain affirmative defenses that the employer can make in the longshore side if they have coverage. Like comparative negligence, they knew the job had risks when they took it on, assumption of risk. So things like that you would lose if you don't have the coverage. So probably the local biggest example here was there's a ship that was being converted to be a fancy floating hotel. There was an out of, non-US owner who came in, and he, figured out, okay, he needed Jones Act. He needed that they call it P&I, protection and indemnity coverage on the vessel. He had that. He had hull coverage, and they were doing the work trying to get the vessel to where it needed to be. So he had an office worker who was working with him, and she decided to help to throw scrap metal off the vessel. And in doing so, she fell overboard, hit her head. No one was there, and unfortunately drowned. So the employer, because they did not have longshore insurance, the jury awarded a settlement of $3.45 million plus interest, which was more than $600,000. And if they had purchased longshore coverage, then probably the insurance company would have defended them, and they could have had those affirmative defenses. Okay, so how does it apply in Washington? So to get coverage in Washington, there's three ways. So standard insurance companies, if you have a larger construction company, if you have, multi-state operations, your workers' comp company may include it for Washington. It depends on the insurance company. The Department of Labor actually has a list, but they may be able to do it. Here in Washington, if you only have Washington operations, it's a lot less likely that the insurance companies will do it because Labor and Industries handles the standard workers' comp. So all of the clerical folks and the less risky work going on. Because of that, nobody really wants to just handle the longshore. So they know that's the riskiest part, and they can't collect enough premium to offset the risk. So there are very, very few insurance companies in Washington that will do this. Usually the minimum premium is, I've seen it as low as 35,000, but it's usually about 100,000. And then there's two, they call them self-insurance or mutuals. So Alma and Signal are the two. Signal writes small business through LIG. Alma writes it through American Equity Underwriters. They usually have a minimum of $10,000, so a little bit better. But the state guarantee fund doesn't apply. And if the whole group has a lot of claims, then you may be forced to pay additional premium. And then we have assigned risk. So because of these options not being great, the legislature went back and said, okay, we need an option of affordable coverage for folks that, so they can get coverage if they can't get it anywhere else. And so they formed the Washington Longshore Assigned Risk Plan, or WARP, as we call it. We accept all employers in good standing, meaning you don't owe premium to anyone else at that point. And our minimum premium is $900. So it's just $900 to get a policy, whether you have, the exposure or not. And then our rates are not competitive, so we're not meant to be less expensive than the other folks. But we will give insurance to anybody, so long, even if you have 100 claims on your record, we still would give you coverage. So, and the state guarantee fund applies. So if anything ever happens to us and we run out of money, the state would back up the claims. Okay. So wait, doesn't L&I pay these claims? So I talked quite a bit to Nathan Kozak, the account manager at L&I, who handles a majority of the maritime claims. And yeah, L&I doesn't pay longshore claims. Longshore is a federal act, so it's in the federal jurisdiction, and L&I can only handle state workers' comp claims. So if you do have a longshore claim and you submit it to L&I, usually they will send you to us. So most of the time, we've done a lot of education with them, so they know how to contact us, and they would send you back over. If you don't have longshore, then they call it controverting the claim or denying the claim. Say nope, they can't help. All right, so 1992, we'll just do a very quick WARP thing. So the assigned risk plan was ending. State studied the problem. We kind of talked about this, and this is how WARP was created. So WARP was established to make affordable longshore. We talked about that. So we actually hire Alaska National Insurance Company to do the policy underwriting for us. We tell them the rates and basically the process. And then, if you get a policy, you'll see Alaska National on it. Claims, they handle the claims and loss control and everything. And then we monitor what's going on and tell them, which way we want them to go if there's ever a question. WARP employs one executive director, which is myself, and I have 13 bosses. So I have a governing committee that meets quarterly, and we have subcommittees. So just a quick makeup of how we operate. The thing I would want to point out here is we try to pull in different interest groups so that we have voices from everywhere. And we do have really constructive meetings. This last year, we brought in a CFO from a construction company to help us, especially to bridge the gap with contractors and construction, which has been great. So he is one of those people that just asks, directly, and it's perfect. So we've I think made a lot of improvements in trying to communicate and understand what's going on there. So specifically, how does this apply to construction? Okay, so when the insurance underwriters are looking at this, or your insurance broker, this is what they're seeing as the ideal structure. So yes, your employer decides to bid on a job that may have maritime aspects to it, and then they consult with their insurance broker, a maritime attorney, to ensure coverage will be in place in the right jurisdictions. And then based on the most likely jurisdiction, based on talking to everybody, they allocate the payroll or hours into the appropriate insurance company or L&I. And then the job takes place, and then the audit happens after the policy period to fine tune the allocation. So when do we really usually figure out what's going on? Usually step 4. It's really difficult sometimes for to anticipate what's going on. This is, I took this from our loss control specialist, who I thought this was a really funny picture. He said, is it a fish? So does it look like a fish? Does it act like a fish? Is it in the water? It must be a fish. So this is, I thought, appropriate because it's the orca, of course, not a fish. So with longshore, sometimes when they go out and they look and they say, yep, this is totally longshore, may not be. It's very hard to tell. The public entities don't help. So I wanted to give this example. This is one of our construction folks, and we've done a lot of work with trying to train the Navy. So you'll see this, looks like the Navy's back at their bad habit of issuing PPI opinions on USL&H. See question 18. This is from bid Q&A. There's a job at Bangers, this is Bremerton, where contractors are being asked to replace air handling units in a building that stores hazardous material on base, location on the attached map. I'm having my folks estimate that this would definitely be a USL&H job. Welcome comments from each, though, which is the hopeful, please tell me this is not longshore. Of course it is. Very unlikely we will be awarded the job because we are bidding at a much higher labor rate because we are including longshore cost. And the Q&A from the Navy, this is the Federal Navy, says, is USL&H required for this project? And they said no. So this is probably the most frustrating because number one, even if the Navy says you do not need longshore, if your employees are entitled to benefits, you are still required to have it as an employer. And it's frustrating because when you're bidding the job, how are you supposed to be paid adequately if the Navy's not seeing that this should be included? There was recently one case where they went back and they figured out that yes, it was required after the fact. And the Navy did adjust the cost to include it, but I know from ports and things, it's very, very difficult if they've decided it's not applicable to get those job change orders done. So it is very frustrating. So on our end, we're trying to educate as much as we possibly can to the Navy and the ports and everybody. It's just a little bit of an uphill battle. So here's some common examples of questions we get. So is this longshore? Security guard in a guard shack at a shipyard who also walks around to make sure things are secure. So this is tricky because there is an exemption in the Longshore Act that says that security guards are exempt from longshore. But if the security guard is also walking around, then yes, he is a longshore worker. And the other trick to this is the courts don't like people to walk in and out of jurisdiction. So if he's doing longshore work for part of the time, then his whole salary for that period of time for that day is going to be longshore. So what about cement truck? So a cement truck driver at a marine terminal or yard who only delivers cement, but to do so gets out of the truck to guide the cement to where it needs to go. So he is, again, a similar thing. If he were just a vendor, just delivering, he would be under that exemption. But because he's getting out of the truck, which I don't know how you wouldn't do that, he's going to be a longshore worker. There are many cases out there where truck drivers that are commonly delivering to terminals are considered longshore workers because that's their purpose is to further maritime commerce, and they do that day in, day out. What about HVAC work on a building that will be used to store submarine parts? So these are the really, really, really tricky ones. If it's an existing building that has already had a maritime purpose, the work is considered longshore work. If it's building a new building that we may or may not know what the use is for, it may not be longshore. It just depends. And on the underwriting side, with the underwriters probably will include it as longshore because they know that if something happens, they're going to have to go to court. They're going to have to defend that claim. So these are the ones that get really, really squirrely.
Katie,
yes.
How far away is that building from the water?
Doesn't matter. So as long as it's on, they consider it a maritime situs. There's no number of feet or yards or anything. It's considered a maritime situs. So even if, a lot of times we'll get questions about the Bremerton base. The base is probably the most complicated one because any parts where it's, the operational part of the base, it's probably going to be longshore, even if it's pretty far from the water. If it's like residences, it might not be. It just depends. The shipyard, I would say the Bremerton shipyard is all ascites. Sometimes it's, is it disconnected? So is there like a major road that the public goes on that disconnects it from something else? But it is extremely subjective. There's no bright line test for it. So excellent question. It would be too easy. I think if they just said, hey, 10 yards, that'd be nice. But unfortunately, no. This one, we have not figured this one out yet. So construction of a dock that will be used for seaplanes. This was a question that came up about a year ago, and I don't think we have a consensus quite yet. Because even though a seaplane is probably going to be a recreational, therefore the dock would not be used for commerce necessarily, but then the seaplane is collecting money from passengers, so is it therefore, so this is the type of discussions that we get into that it gets really confusing. The moral of that story is probably just get the policy. If you're not sure, get it and then you're protected. Warehouse workers unloading fish from fishing vessels and transporting them to the warehouse to be processed. Yep, those are longshore workers. So aquaculture is exempt. Seafood processing itself is exempt, but unloading and transporting to the warehouse is all stevedoring. So that's considered longshore work. Fishing vessel maintenance worker who might be signing on as crew during the season but isn't under contract yet. He's probably a longshore guy. Construction of a new building. So this is the new building at the shipyard, which will be used to store spent nuclear fuel in the future. This actually, there was a lawsuit related specifically to this situation, and that one, which I think was Fifth Circuit, they said no, it was not longshore, but there are other cases where it might be. Volunteers cleaning up marine debris on a beach. So this one is sneaky. Volunteers are not employees. So they actually would probably not be longshore workers. The trick is you'd have to convince LMI to cover them. So volunteers are always a little tricky. It's more of a liability coverage. Repair of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. So usually bridges are considered to be a pertinence of the land. So they consider it an extension of the land rather than being over the water, even though they're over the water. The only exception is the second one, the construction of a new bridge on the anchored caissons before construction is complete. That can be longshore. So before it's attached to the seabed, it can be longshore. There can be some Jones Act exposure in there. Bridges can get real squirrely. We've talked many times about if they ever, worked on the Columbia River and did some sort of bridge there, we're gonna run into lots of questions for sure. So moral of the story, it is extremely confusing. What about subcontractors? So this is a question that comes up quite a bit. So what if your company has only one employee? Do you still need longshore insurance? So if you're a sole proprietor, then no, you are not required to have it. But if you are a member of an LLC with only one employee, then you would be. So the LLC is considered the maritime employer, and you are the employee of that corporation. And so therefore you are required to have longshore. Now, unless something happens, you're not going to sue yourself. You're not going to bring yourself into a lawsuit. That being said, if you have a subcontractor who is a one-man shop or a one-man LLC, and they don't cover the longshore, then you have to be mindful that you may need to cover them, because if they don't have it, then it flows upward. So, and I put the wording here: every employer shall be liable for and shall secure payment to his employees of the compensation. In the case of an employer who is a subcontractor, only if such subcontractor fails to secure payment of compensation shall the contractor be liable for and required to secure the payment of compensation. So if they don't cover it, then it can put you on the hook. So, and already answered this one, but I'm going to repeat it because it's important. But what if the port/navy/general contractor I'm working for doesn't require longshore in the contract? I even checked with the contract guy and he said no. Does that exempt me? And nope, you are still required to carry USL&H if you are working on a maritime situs and the work has maritime status. So many times the folks working on contract requirements are not permitted to include specific requirements. So you'll see something in the contract that says you're required to carry any and all necessary coverage for your employees. So they'll keep it very vague. Or they may not understand when it's needed. I think the Navy is probably the good example. However, even confirmation from these entities will not exempt you from the federal requirements. So it's important to understand for your business. So I know it's a lot, so I wanted to give a little bit of time also for questions. So if you wanted to put them in the chat or ask, I am open to anything.
Well, this is a great presentation. Do we have any questions for Katie? Let's see here. We're going to check the chat room. See if I have anything popped up there for you. Let's see here. Any questions? I'm going to type in the chat room to all the folks. We're quiet today out there, Katie. Oh, we see great presentation. We get some comments coming in. One person asked, "Does this cover ready mix or bulk concrete?" That was by Leslie Burns.
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of times, the vendor exception would apply if you're just like dropping it and going. It's important to ask the underwriter, and one thing I've learned also is if you have the question asked ahead of time, it saves a lot of headaches in the back end, because the underwriter will have it in writing. So whatever happens on that job, if you've asked ahead of time, they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, yeah, you intended to do this. And even if you're not, like, if you don't have a policy, you're not sure, feel free to email me. I can go to the underwriter and ask the question, and then you'll have the documentation, the string of emails, which I think is always helpful if something comes up. Yeah, and the question about, I see residential docks and boathouses. Most of the time, I say most of the time, the residential docks are okay because they're not for maritime commerce purposes. That being said, we'll see a lot of things with like, if there's any kind of commercial vessel at all that will be tied up to them, sometimes it can ping into the commercial side. But for the most part, the residential stuff, you're safe. There's a marina exclusion, and there's also, if it's not used for maritime commerce, it's okay. Let's see, potential demo installation of conduit along a pier at the Coast Guard base. Would it be beneficial? Absolutely, for the electricians. Yes, they would absolutely be longshore workers. The other thing I'll tell you too, if you want to just get an idea of rates, we actually publish our rates for Warp, even though, we're not really competitive, but our rates are published on our website. So you can download them. And if you look for like electricians, it'll tell you the rate per $100 of payroll. So you can get an idea of what the cost would be. So when you're bidding, you can include that amount.
So Katie, talk about the difference between hours and premium, which is different from L&I.
So this is just to make it as confusing as possible. So L&I, you're reporting hours, but for longshore, you're reporting payroll. And most states outside of Washington, workers' comp is rated based on payroll dollars. So it's, unfortunately, it's just very confusing in Washington. The one thing I will tell you, if you do need longshore for a job, you don't need to also pay L&I. So you can carve out that payroll. It's, you just have to do that conversion, hours to payroll or back, to carve out the L&I piece, and you don't have to pay twice for the work. So it's one or the other. Let's see. Does this apply to work on a port's property, but it's a restaurant? Oh, that's a good one. Maybe. That's a solid maybe. It depends a lot on where it is and what the purpose is. Restaurant, you're probably okay. It's probably like in the marina exclusion, but it would be worth asking the question. And any of these that I'm not answering enough, feel free to drop me an email with details, and I'm happy to give you a better, more extensive answer on these. Let's see. Yes, Washington State Ferry is definitely maritime commerce. So work related to that system definitely is usually going to be longshore. So yeah, that's a good question. And let's see, payroll includes office or just field. So the payroll is only going to be the folks that are doing the longshore work. That being said, it has to be the full payroll for a day of longshore. So for example, like if you have a guy and he does, just inspection work or something in the office for the first part of the day, and then the second part of the day he's working on the docks, that whole day has to be allocated to longshore. So the courts don't like people walking in and out of coverage. Longshore is longshore. So very good questions. Very, very good questions. Oh gosh, working at the aquarium on a pier, probably yes. That probably is going to be, only because, especially if it's the Seattle waterfront, there's other things than the aquarium going on there. And there's commercial, there's a commercial purpose for it, even though the aquarium itself is more like I think it probably would be in the museum category. But yeah, that's probably going to be longshore. Yep, construction work on a pier, definitely longshore, for sure. Yep. If it's a residential or like a HOA type pier, it can be gray area. So if you shoot me an email, I can give you a better explanation on it. Let's see. Okay, hydro dam rehab work on the Columbia River where the dam is operated by the PUD. We have equipment employees working from barges. So the barges, you will want to have longshore just in case, but you also want to look at Jones Act. So because they're on the barge, it's probably longshore. It's probably mostly longshore. Just make sure you've also got Jones Act coverage just in case. And that's another thing. Warp, we can do a very, very, very small Jones Act limit. They call it maritime employers liability. We can do up to 100,000. It's not enough to cover most of anything. It's just a just in case limit. But we do have that available as part of the policy if you ever need it. Really good questions. Get me on my toes. This is awesome. Very, very good. Let's see. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And thank you, folks, for the questions. This is great to get the answers. And if you don't have Katie's information down yet, take a screenshot of it on your phone. There we see some rounds of applauses coming up. Thank you, everybody. We love to see the feedback, and I'm sure Katie appreciates it as well. But please contact her directly with any specific questions that you have that you're trying to find answers on. Katie, we certainly appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you so much.
And I will have this PowerPoint available for anybody who sends me an email, and I will upload the presentation to our YouTube website probably in a few hours, maybe this afternoon sometime. So you can go back and review.
Excellent. We always have folks asking about it there, but when that's going to be posted, it takes a little bit of time to upload and whatnot. I do want to let everyone know that our next virtual safety summit is May 14th, 9 a.m., same place, same time. Keep an eye out for that meeting invite. Please join us. And also, if you have any ideas on upcoming presenters, maybe you saw someone at Construction Safety Day or at another function, or maybe coming up here on some of our future conferences, please let Brian or I know. We're always looking for folks that might have some or bring some value to the table with regard to industry specific information and really all things safety and health. So thank you, everybody, for your help and participation. We appreciate you. Be safe out there. We will see you next month.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you again, Katie. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rhett.
Thank you. Decent turnout today, Brian?
Decent turnout and terribly interesting information. And I've already seen this presentation, and I learned more today than I did when I saw the presentation. So yeah, it's a convoluted world, I guess.
Weird. It's so strange to hear these different nuances. I just, just silly.
But I would have Katie's email and contact her information in my phone because it seems like there'd be a lot of questions about certain situations, and I have a funny feeling a lot of people aren't covering their employees, and especially like Routes Concrete, right? They go down to the dock to dump one load, the guy gets out, and they're under coverage. I mean, any of the concrete drivers are going to be if they're on the docks, even if they're only there for 15 minutes or whatever to unload a load.
Yeah, I'm looking here, Isaac. We already had posted it in the chat room. You must have came in late, but we will repost it for you here momentarily.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I got
you
on
bet.
about 5
Oh,
minutes late.
okay. I'll do it again.
I got it. I got it, Brian.
You
It's
got
done.
it. Okay.
Yeah, I already
All right.
did it.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, sometimes
Thanks.
it doesn't pop up. Thanks for joining, Isaac.
Yeah.
So,
No
for
problem.
some
Thank
reason
you,
that
guys.
chat room doesn't pop up. I don't understand why. It's so bizarre why it wouldn't just show the whole chat when you log in, but that's the way it goes.
Whatever.
So,
As long as we get it.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about the golf tourney. I can't believe so many people
I
are
can't either.
signed
I'm
up
so
already.
excited. I mean,
Yeah, wow.
it's just great. And hopefully the snow in that background picture is all gone by now.
Yeah.
And people are out playing. But
yeah,
to have 14 of 18 holes already sponsored and all the drink carts and the lunch and everything else is already sponsored. So Mindy and Jessica are doing a really great job.
Oh, that's great. Hey, your recording is still going. You might want to stop that.
Let me stop that.
Yeah, no problem. I just noticed that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, well, I'm excited, buddy. And now for next month, what are we looking like? We have Nancy for June, but we don't have anything for May.